What's up, people? Fisher coming at you. I've got Siddhartha here with me, and we're going to be reading page 75. I can't remember what chapter number it is at this point. It really bugs me when books don't write a number above the chapters. I really ought to do that myself, but I haven't done that yet. And this book's nearly dead. I've taped it back together so many times. I guess there's no point in really investing my time in making this a better book at this point. But one chapter today. It's called Samsara, and it's on page 75. But before we get into reading Samsara, I want to say a couple of things to you. So today, when you're seeing this video, is Monday, and that's the 18th. So you're going to have an assignment today, which is about Samsara. On Wednesday, you're going to have an assignment that's going to be on the next chapter, which is called By the River or The River. I can't remember which. And then there will be no office hours this Friday because this is a holiday weekend, and there's going to be no assignment a week from today. So next Monday, Memorial Day, no work, not doing anything, which means typically I post work on Mondays and Wednesdays. If I'm not posting anything on Monday, that means there's only one day next week that I'm going to give you any work. And the week after that is exam week. I'm not giving you anything on exam week. There's no homework on exam week. As far as I'm concerned, next week, Wednesday, is the last day that you're doing anything for my class. So we're obviously not going to finish all of Siddhartha in that time because we still got there are 12 chapters. And we're on chapter 7, I think is what we're at right now. So we're not going to be able to finish it. And, that's just part of quarantine life. I would encourage you at some point to finish the book, but we will have a meaningful assignment on Wednesday that'll have you look back over the book of what you've learned. And hopefully you can take something away from it, something powerful, something that sticks with you. It really bums me out that we don't get to have the circle conversations that I normally do with this book, that we don't get to see each other and discuss the way that we typically would, because this book is transformational or transformative for people. I've had people come back to my class, several people in the last few years alone, and say, Fisher, I just want to thank you for Siddhartha because it really changed the way I viewed the world and myself. There are people who stopped caring so much about other people's opinions. There are people who stopped getting so stressed out about little things and started looking at the bigger picture. And yeah, it's helped a lot of people. And I don't mean the religions in the book. I don't mean Buddhism or Hinduism. I just mean the ideas and the discussions that we got to have, and just the different perspectives that other people have can be really powerful and life-changing. So anyway, I'm going to step off my soapbox again. I'm going to pick up the book and I'm going to read a little bit of Samsara. So Siddhartha, he's starting to really, really get enmeshed in the physical world. He's not very spiritual at all anymore. In fact, it kind of alludes to the fact that his spirituality is nearly gone, and he's becoming full-blown hedonistic. And that's what samsara is. This chapter is all about him going too far. So he's already gone too far into the spiritual realm when he was a samana in chapter 2. He went to the point where he was torturing his body and trying to kill his corporeal body, not kill it all the way, but nearly kill it, so he could really get more connected with the spiritual realm. And now he's going the other direction. He's moved too far from the spiritual realm, and he's gone too much into, pursuits of the flesh, be it eating or drinking or whatever. And that's what this chapter is about. And so we're going to start right here on page 75, Samsara. For a long time, Siddhartha had lived the life of the world without being in it. His senses, which had deadened during his ardent samana years, were again awakened. He had tasted riches, passion, and power, but for a long time he remained a samana in his heart. Clever Kamala had recognized this. His life was always directed by the art of thinking, waiting, and fasting. The people of the world, the ordinary people, were still alien to him, just as he was apart from them. The years passed by. Enveloped by comfortable circumstances, Siddhartha hardly noticed their passing. He'd become rich. He had long possessed a house of his own servants, and a garden at the outskirts of town by the river. People liked him. They came to him if they wanted money or advice. However, with the exception of Kamala, he had no close friends. That glorious, exalted awakening which he had once experienced in his youth, in the days after Gautama's preaching, after the parting of Govinda, the alert expectation, the pride of standing alone without teachers and doctrines, that eager readiness to hear the divine voice within his own heart, had gradually become a memory, had passed. The only fountainhead from which had once been near wait, the only fountainhead which had once been near and which had once sung loudly within him, now murmured softly in the distance. However, many things which he had learned from the Samanas, he had learned from Gautama, from his father, and from the Brahmins, still remained for a long time. A moderate life, pleasure in thinking, hours of meditation, secret knowledge of the self, of the eternal self, that was neither body nor consciousness. Many of these he had retained. Others were submerged and covered with dust. Now, this is like a really long metaphor here. It's like let's see. It's actually a simile. So it's almost an epic simile like we would have read in freshman year with Beowulf. It is long. So see if you get this comparison. Just as the potter's wheel, once set in motion, still turns for a long time and then turns only very slowly and stops, so did the wheel of the ascetic, the wheel of thinking, the wheel of discrimination, still revolve for a long time in Siddhartha's soul. It still revolved, but slowly and hesitatingly. It had nearly come to a standstill, slowly like moisture entering the dying tree trunk, slowly filling and rotting it. So did the world and inertia creep into Siddhartha's soul. It slowly filled his soul, made it heavy, made it tired, sent it to sleep. But on the other hand, his senses had become more awakened. They learned a great deal, experienced a great deal. Siddhartha had learned how to transact business affairs, to exercise power over people, to amuse himself with women. He had learned to wear fine clothes, to command servants, to bathe with sweet smelling waters. He had learned to eat sweet and carefully prepared foods, also fish and meat and fowl, spices and dainties, and to drink wine which made him lazy and forgetful. He had learned to play dice and chess, to watch dancers, to be carried in a sedan chair, to sleep on a soft bed. But he had always felt different from and superior to others. He had always watched them a little scornfully, with a slightly mocking disdain, with that disdain which a samana always feels towards people of the world. If Kamaswami was upset, if he felt that he had been insulted, or if he was troubled with his business affairs, Siddhartha had always regarded him mockingly. But slowly and imperceptibly, with the passing of the seasons, his mockery and feeling of superiority diminished. Gradually, along with his growing riches, Siddhartha himself acquired some of the characteristics of the ordinary people, some of their childishness, some of their anxiety. And yet he envied them. The more he became like them, the more he envied them. He envied them the one thing that he lacked and that they had, the sense of importance with which they had lived their lives, the depth of their pleasures and their sorrows, the anxiety, but the sweet happiness of their continual power to love. These people were always in love with themselves. So right there, Siddhartha's saying the problem with always being like level-headed and calm is that you don't get those high highs, those high emotional highs, and those painful lows. You can never really feel the sweet exaltation of victory if you haven't faced the failure of a defeat. And the balance of those two things in life is what makes life exciting and worth living. If you always win, it's boring. If you always lose, it's torment. But if you can experience the highs and the lows, that's life, man. That's what we savor. That's why we keep coming back, is because of those highs and those lows. With their children, or in love. They're in love with their children, in love with their honor or money, with plans or hopes. But he did not learn from them these childlike pleasures and follies. He only learned the unpleasant things from them which he despised. It happened more frequently that after a merry evening he lay late in bed the following morning and felt dull and tired. He would become annoyed and impatient. When Kamaswami bored him with his worries, he would laugh too loudly, and he would laugh when he lost at dice. His face was still more clever and intellectual than other people's, but he rarely laughed, and gradually his face assumed the expression which are so often found amongst rich people, the expression of discontent, of sickliness, of displeasure, of idleness, of lovelessness. Slowly the soul sickness of the rich crept over him. Like a veil, like a thin mist, a weariness settled on Siddhartha. Slowly, every day a little thicker, every month a little darker, every year a little heavier. As a new dress grows old with time, loses its bright color, becomes stained and creased, and the hems frayed, and here and there weak and threadbare places, so had Siddhartha's new life, which he had begun after his parting from Govinda, become old. In the same way, it lost its color and sheen. With the passing of the years, the creases and stains accumulated, and hidden in the depths, here and there, already appearing, waited disillusionment and nausea. Siddhartha did not notice it. He only noticed that the bright and clear inward voice that had once awakened in him and had always guided him in his finest hours had become silent. The world had caught him. Pleasures, covetousness, idleness, and finally, also that vice that he had always despised and scorned the most as the most foolish, acquisitiveness, property, possessions. Riches had also finally trapped him. They were no longer a game and a toy. They had become a chain and a burden. Siddhartha wandered along a strange twisted path. This last and most Siddhartha wandered along a strange twisted path of this last and most base declivity through the game of dice. Since the time he had stopped being a samana in his heart, Siddhartha began to play dice for money and jewels with increasing fervor, a game in which he had previously smiled and indulgently taken part as a custom of the ordinary people. He was a formidable player. A few dared play him, for his stakes were so high and reckless. He played the games as a result of a heartfelt need. He derived a passionate pleasure through the gambling away and squandering of wretched money. In no other way could he show more clearly and mockingly his contempt for riches and false deity of businessmen. So he staked high and unsparingly, hated himself, mocked himself. He won thousands, he threw thousands away, lost money, lost jewels, lost country houses, won again, lost again. He loved the anxiety, that terrible and oppressive anxiety which he experienced during the game of dice, during the suspense of high stakes. He loved this feeling and continually sought to renew it, to increase it, to stimulate it. For in this feeling alone did he experience some kind of happiness, some kind of excitement, some kind of heightened living in the midst of his satiated, tepid, insipid existence. And after every game he lost, he devoted himself to the procurement of new riches, went eagerly after business, and pressed his debtors for payment, for he wanted to play again. He wanted to squander again. He wanted to show his contempt for riches again. Siddhartha became impatient at losses. He lost his patience with slow-paying debtors. He was no longer kind-hearted to beggars. No longer had he a desire to give gifts and loans to the poor. He who staked 10,000 on the throw of a dice and laughed became more hard and mean in business, and sometimes dreamt of money at night. And whenever he awakened from his hateful spell, when he saw his face reflected in the mirror on the wall of his bedroom, grown older and uglier, whenever shame and nausea overtook him, he fled again, fled to a new game of chance, fled in confusion to passion, to wine, and from there back again to the urges for acquiring and hoarding wealth. He wore himself out in this senseless cycle. He became old and he became sick. So the problem with, he talked a little bit there about the typical disease of the rich. If you are super, super wealthy, then there's nothing that you really desire that you can't have. Like you can buy anything. And so you get bored. That is the sickness of the rich that he's referring to. And the only thing I can compare it to, because I'm a teacher and definitely not rich, is if you've ever played a video game, most of you have, and you've ever either gotten so powerful in the video game that there's no longer any challenges left, or you've cheated, like put in like a God mode or something like that. For a little while, it is awesome. Like you could just go around and do whatever you want, and it's not hard and it's not challenging, and it's fun to just be able to go out there and do anything at any moment. But a short time later, you get sick of that game because there's no challenge. There are only highs There are no lows. And without that balance, we get bored. We're not getting that sweet release, that anxiety, that tension. Or am I going to make it? Am I going to win? Am I going to survive? If you don't get that anxiety and that euphoria from winning, or that grim determination to restart from the bottom, from defeat, then life is boring. And that's where Siddhartha's at. And every time he realizes that and he gets disgusted with what he's become, he gets drunk, or he goes and he sleeps with women, or he goes and does drugs, or whatever. He's searching for temporary escape. Gambling, alcohol, drugs, all of those things, if you use them as a method for survival, they will ruin you. They're not an escape. And I'm not some kind of anti-drug advocate here. I'm not talking to you about the dangers of drugs and alcohol. I mean, I am, but that's not my point. You have to do things in moderation. And I don't mean drugs and alcohol. I mean in life. You got to figure out what the right amount of you to put into something is. If you put too much of yourself into something, then that can be just as toxic as being addicted to a substance. You don't want to get addicted to anything. You got to have balance in life. Okay, and Siddhartha doesn't have that. And so I'm going to skip forward this chapter a little bit because he gets tired of it all. I'm skipping forward to page 84, about halfway down. Oh no, actually, I don't know if I want to skip that part. Where is Kamala? Okay, so I'm going to start on page 81. Siddhartha had spent the night at his house with dancers and wine, had pretended to be superior to his companions, which he no longer was. He had drunk much wine, and late after midnight he went to bed, tired and yet agitated, nearly in tears and in despair. In vain did he try to sleep. His heart was so full of misery he felt he could no longer endure it. He was full of nausea, which overpowered him like a distasteful wine, or music that was too sweet and superficial, or like the too sweet smile of the dancers, or the too sweet perfume of their hair and breasts. But above all, he was nauseated with himself. It's easy to be like you, right there where he says he's sick of everything and he just despises everything. That makes me think of people who are just generally grouchy. Like there doesn't seem to be a reason for it, but most of the time they're angry with other people and they're grouchy and they're very judgmental. And I just know because of this and life experience that people like that, the reason that they're so miserable is because they hate themselves so much and they're jealous of other people who don't hate themselves. And so they try to lash out. They try to project their own inadequacies and their own anxieties onto other people to try to feel better about themselves. It's similar to bullying. People who were bullied end up bullying. That's the vicious cycle of life. And so if you can break that cycle by understanding what's happening, that's powerful. If you realize that this person is acting like this or saying this thing to me, not because I'm inadequate, because they're inadequate and they know it, that is power. That is self-reflective power. That's why we need to self-reflect and think about our positives and our flaws. And we need to be okay with what we're good at and what we're not good at. And then when you're okay with who you are, nobody can hurt you, at least not emotionally, because you're too strong for that at that point. People can try to insult you and try to taunt you. Doesn't bother you because you love you. And that's all that matters. Sadly, Siddhartha went on to a pleasure garden that belonged to him and closed the gates. He sat under a mango tree and felt horror and death in his heart. He sat and felt himself dying, withering, finishing. Gradually, he collected his thoughts and mentally went through the whole of his life, from the earliest days which he could remember. When had he really ever been happy? Had he ever truly experienced joy? Well, he'd experienced this several times. He had tasted it in the days of his boyhood, when he had won praise from the Brahmins, when he had far outstriped his contemporaries, when he had excelled himself at the recitals of the holy verses, in argument with the learned men, when assisting with the sacrifices, then he had felt it in his heart. A path lies before you which you are called to follow. The gods await you. And again, as a youth, when his continually soaring goal had propelled him in and out of crowds of similar seekers, when he had striven hard to understand the Brahman's teachings, when every freshly acquired knowledge only engendered a new thirst, then again, in the midst of his thirst, in the midst of his efforts, had he thought, onwards, onwards, this is your path. He had heard the voice when he had left his home and chosen the life of the samanas, and again when he had left the samanas and gone to the perfect one, and also when he had left him for the unknown. How long was it now since he had heard his voice? Since he had soared to any new height? How flat and desolate his path had been. How many long years had he spent without any lofty goal, without any thirst, without any exultation, content with small pleasures, and yet never really satisfied? Without knowing it, he'd endeavored and longed all these years to be like all these other people, like these children, and yet his life had been much more wretched and poorer than theirs. For their aims were not his, nor their sorrows his. This whole world of Kamaswami's people had only been a game to him, a dance, a comedy which one watches. Only Kamala was dear to him, had been of value to him. But was she still? Did he still need her? Did she still need him? Were they not just playing a game without an end? Was it necessary to live for it? No. This game was called Samsara, a game for children, a game which was perhaps enjoyably played once, twice, 10 times. But when was it worth playing continually? Then Siddhartha knew that the game had finished, that he could play it no longer. A shudder passed through his body. He felt as if someone had died. He sat all that day under the mango tree, thinking of his father, thinking of Govinda, thinking of Gautama. Had he left all of these in order to become Kamaswami? He sat there till night fell. When he looked up and saw the stars, he thought, I'm sitting under a mango tree in my pleasure garden. Oh, he smiled a little. Was it necessary? Was it right? Was it not a foolish thing that he should possess a mango tree and a garden? He had finished with that. That also died in him. He rose and said farewell to the mango tree and the pleasure garden. He had not had any food that day. He felt extremely hungry and thought of his house in the town, of his room and his bed, of the table with food. He smiled wearily, shook his head, and said goodbye to all of these things. That same night, Siddhartha left the garden and the town, and he never returned. For a long time, Kamaswami tried to find him, believing he had fallen into the hands of bandits. Kamala did not try to find him. She was not surprised when she had learned that Siddhartha had disappeared. Had she not always expected it? Was he not a samana without a home, a pilgrim? She had felt it more than ever in their last meeting. In the midst of her pain at her loss, she rejoiced that she had pressed him so close to her heart on that last occasion, had felt so completely possessed and mastered by him. When she heard the first news of Siddhartha's disappearance, she went to the window where she kept a rare songbird in a golden cage. She opened the door of the cage, took the bird out, and let it fly away. For a long time, she looked after the disappearing bird. From that day, she received no more visitors and kept her house closed. After a time, she found that she was with child as a result of her last meeting with Siddhartha. And that is the end of that chapter. So, turns out that Siddhartha is a deadbeat dad and Kamala is a baby mama. And that's where we stop. So look back over that chapter, just like we do with all of our other chapters, and find one thing that stood out most to you. It's kind of a dark chapter. It's kind of examining a lot of the darkness of humanity. And I don't mean like evil, murder, that kind of darkness. I mean like the everyday darkness. Dependency on chemicals, dependency on gambling, addiction, depravity, hedonism, eating too much, drinking too much, lusting too much, all those kind of things that are constantly just like in the background, the hedonistic temptations that we face every day. So Look back through that darkness and see what stood out most to you. And you don't have to bare your soul to me. That's fine. You don't have to say this one stood out to me because of this, because I am this, but try to reflect as much as you can on a personal level and share as much as you can with me without feeling like you're oversharing. Okay? The important thing is that you're learning about yourself for yourself. That's what I really want you to do. I want you to leave my class with the ability to not just say that you're self reflective, but actually look inward at your own thoughts and feelings and beliefs and examine them and think on a regular basis, is this still me? Or why am I doing this? Or is this the right thing for me to do? All right. That's all I got for you today. It's kind of dark and dreary because I'm recording this on Sunday, and Sunday is gross right now. So I'm just kind of in a mood, especially after reading this chapter. Hopefully you guys are having a better day. And remember, if you are having a bad day, just pick up a LaCroix and they'll make you happy. Peace.